Anyone who's been gaming for at least a couple of decades will know that we see cyclical popularity with genres. The 2D platformer was huge in the late 80s and early 90s. It was to gaming then what the FPS is to gaming today. It really fell out of favour with the advent of 3D, but it's been making a great comeback with the indie revolution of the last few years, augmented with physics and other modern goodies. And the latest game flying the flag for the best genre of them all is Beep. I'm not going to tiptoe around it. Beep is the kind of game a lot of people will look at and just think, no chance. It has what you might call a family-friendly aesthetic. I really hate that phrase. And the 2D platformer is by and large a genre with a reputation as being more for kids, which is totally unfounded, but that belief still exists. And to look at Beep, you might just think, this is for kids. If you're the type to do that, it's your loss, because Beep is an extremely solid, well-designed game that does everything you'd want from a 2D platformer, regardless of your age. The game sets up a scenario at the start, which is what you're watching here, so I won't bother describing it. I call it a scenario because that really is all it is. It's not a story. It's a basic idea to just contextualise the game. If you want a story, you won't find it here. I would have liked more, but what there is on par for the genre, so no complaints from me. You begin controlling your little Beep ship in the level selection hub, which is a solar system map you can fly around. There are 3 planets, each split down into 2 hemispheres, each with 4 levels. Each hemisphere has its own theme, so you've got grassland, desert, swamp and so forth. This means you get a very regular change of aesthetic, which visually keeps the game interesting. The whole thing is really just a glorified level selection menu, but I find it very endearing, particularly as there are nice little touches such as the planets visibly orbiting the star. Most of the hemispheres are locked off initially, with a certain number of antimatter nuggets needed to unlock them, which are collected while playing through the levels. This idea doesn't work quite as well as it probably should, as the whole point of unlocking levels, rather than simply playing through them sequentially, is to let the player control their experience, but you'll probably find that you have to play through the whole of one hemisphere to unlock the next, and there are only 6 in total. You aren't given the freedom to choose which levels you want to play and in what order, and without that, the idea of a hub with level unlocks just doesn't really add anything of substance. The game wastes no time introducing you to its various mechanics once you get into the first level, showing you platforming, combat and physics manipulation pretty much right away. But even so, Beep doesn't show you all its tricks at once, which is exactly how it should be. The game grows and changes as new mechanics are introduced in later levels, which keeps things interesting and fresh throughout all 24 levels. Your movement of your beatbots is light and loose, and you can do things like change direction while jumping, but it doesn't feel floaty or imprecise. You have a great deal of control over your little robot, and if you miss a jump, you won't feel like the game's cheating you. If you do miss a jump, or die in some other way, which you'll find happens quite a bit as you get further into the game, you'll be sent back to the last checkpoint. You have unlimited lives, but checkpoints are fairly rare, and you'll have to replay perhaps a couple of minutes if you die, which feels like an uncommonly adequate punishment in this age of developers being afraid of punishing failure. The game is actually pretty tough later on. It's not Super Meat Boy, but don't let the visual style fool you. This game takes pleasure in killing you a lot. But the whole thing is streamlined in an intelligent way. Many of the collectibles you need to unlock later levels are often connected to puzzles or combat, and can be fairly time consuming to collect, but once you've collected something, it remains collected no matter how many times you die, provided you don't return to the level selection hub before completing the level. This means retreading ground after dying is a perfect punishment, never becoming tedious as you can quickly get back to where you were, skipping the more time consuming stuff like puzzles. Probably the most immediately striking thing about the platforming is that your beatbots have little studs on their wheels which can be used to hook onto and hang over the edge of ledges. It also means you can ride right up vertical walls, but the level design doesn't exploit the idea as often as it perhaps should. Its most common application is making it easy to grab hold of objects on lower ledges with your gravity ray by hanging over the edge. The gravity manipulation runs right along the spectrum, from generic box stacking to reach higher platforms, to things like manipulating ledges to create platforms to stand on, using enemy corpses as shields or projectiles, and more interesting and unique puzzles based around object manipulation. You use your right mouse button to grab hold of things and can move them around freely with the mouse, but you will find that you need line of sight to hold objects, and that you can't move objects you're touching. Many puzzles are built around the idea of line of sight, often requiring you to jump around an object and manipulate things inside it through holes on different sides, which marries platforming and puzzles well. You'll also find the no touching thing is also an idea well used with some puzzles, as you, for instance, carry a platform to protect yourself, but moving yourself and keeping the protective platform in place relative to your position proves to be a satisfying challenge. There are no puzzles to rival the likes of a dedicated puzzle game like Braids, but you will find them well designed and interesting, which is pretty nice for what amounts to a secondary gameplay element. Just when you get to the point where you feel comfortable with what you think the game is, it throws a new idea into the mix to keep things fresh: flight. The flying levels are very large and very open, with a real verticality to them, meaning there's a lot to explore, and that the level design changes to accommodate the changing gameplay is great. Flight is fuel based, so you won't just zip around the levels, you'll have to actually think about what you're doing and find refueling stations. The thing I like most about the flight isn't that it exists in the game, quite as much as how limited it is. It only appears for a few levels, and it provides some great diversity in the gameplay to mix things up. But then it's gone, and you're doing other stuff. And this kind of shifting gameplay design is, I think, the very best way to make a game consistently interesting, and Beep handles it with skill and style. Flying isn't the only thing you'll see, there's also swimming in a few levels, which alters the gameplay in the kind of obvious ways you'd expect. You'll also find further mechanics added later on, but I'll leave you to discover those yourself. And all of these mechanics, both the things you see every level and the things you only do here and there, give the game a lot of diversity and make it interesting and fresh feeling all the way to the end. Far too many games run out of steam before they're over, but Beep does a great job of pacing its ideas, but also providing enough of them to make for varied and diverse gameplay, and none of it is gimmicky or just tacked on. The combat is good, but not in the way you might think. Barring a few exceptions, you're going to get through most fights by auto-aiming, which you do just by mousing over an enemy. But don't turn your nose up at the idea, because the combat isn't really combat quite as much as it is platforming presented through a combat filter. If you look at video footage of the combat, and you look at the enemy and the locked on reticle, and that's all you see, you're going to think, with good reason, that the combat is a bit rubbish. But if you then instead look at the same video and look at the beatbot during the combat, and how it jumps and dodges and weaves between projectiles fired by an enemy soldier, or maniacally flees a suicide bomb robot, you'll see that the combat is very much about the platforming. It actually brings to mind Sands of Time, not that the two are mechanically similar, but they do both do the same thing, present what is ostensibly combat, but is in fact dynamic platforming using the combat as its foundation. And it is good stuff. Any platformer that can make combat that defers to its platforming has done something special. The beatbots themselves are very communicative. They speak a lot, responding to things happening in the game. What they say is all electronic-y and distorted, but you can make out some things clearly, like them sometimes saying "beam me up Scotty" when returning to the beep ship at the end of a level. They also have a few facial expressions. When firing their guns they frown, and when injured their face screen flashes red. These little touches add quite a lot of personality to the game. And while it's not a huge thing, there's definitely a Wall-E vibe going on, which I enjoyed. It's very charming. The art, as you can see, is very bright and vibrant and attractive, and the paler shades of the background do a great job of making it clear what's what. And as mentioned, the regular changing visual theme means it won't get old. The game's marketing mentions procedural animations, but the range of movement is so limited that this isn't likely to impress you, if you even notice at all. Something I found frustrating is that there are no graphical configuration options, with the game running at a fixed 1280 by 720. You can run it in a resizable window, but all this does is squashes the image, and the total absence of customization is annoying. You'll find this extends to the player profiles too. You get 3 profiles, but unless I'm a complete idiot and just couldn't find it, there's no way through the game to reset them to start a new game once all 3 slots are in use. I did the obvious thing then and went into the game's installation folder and deleted the save files, but this just prevented me from using those profile slots at all. I ended up having to actually edit the game files to delete all the information in the profiles. It's easy enough to do that, but if you have to edit game files to be able to do something as simple as start a new game, something is clearly wrong. These are only minor issues though, and they're largely separate to the gameplay experience, so it's really not a big thing. There is ultimately nothing exceptional about Beep, but it does do everything you could ask for from a 2D platformer. It has a large range of gameplay mechanics, all of which intelligently defer to and enhance the platforming. And the fairly regular way new ideas are introduced, even if only for a few levels, keeps things interesting and makes you want to see what the next world introduces. The art style might make you think this game isn't for you, but if you enjoy platformers, you should definitely be checking out this game.